So we talked earlier this hour, and you're going to have to help me tie this up in a bow and take this the direction you want. We talked about Shreveport's sort of transition from an old southern city to what it wanted to be, a segregated, a vibrant, an economic boom town. And what kept us from actually becoming that was not only a whole bunch of old school stubborn white guys, believe it or not so much. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this.
No, they didn't have much to do with this because we got to go back to one bumper sticker.
Not what?
One bumper sticker tells the story.
Tells the story about what?
Shreveport on the grow.
Yes.
Okay.
What year
that was
is
the thing? This is about 1962, 63. And let me tell you what's happened by then. The key is when people talk and they ask me about the plane crash, well, I never have told much of the story of what really happened.
Now, when you talk about the plane crash.
That's the Wallace Lake plane crash, 1954. 6 key Shreveport leaders were killed on the plane crash, as well as the president of Braniff Airlines and 4 other men who were very significant, who were going to really play a role in Shreveport. And the key, what happened is, at that particular moment, we didn't realize what was coming down the pike.
What was coming down the pike?
The loss of white-collar jobs in Shreveport. It all started with United Gas. And United Gas,
which for years was right there at the corner of Fairfield and Jordan.
That's right.
It's the state building
and
now.
According to Mr. McGowan, I've read every interview I could find with him, 1,000 jobs were in the building. He didn't know exactly how many. He said, I don't know how many people work for United Gas, but I can tell you there are at least 1,000 jobs in the building.
So we're going back early to mid-'60s when Shreveport's economy was basically, was it an oil and gas town?
It was an oil and gas town, and we had lots of white-collar jobs. In 1954, the reason that Texas Eastern moved into the building across from the backside of the courthouse, that was going to be Caddo Arms. That was going to be a big place like the Fairmont. And it didn't work out. They started having financing problems. Texas Eastern needed a place to go because of why? There wasn't one available square inch of downtown office space leasable. It's in a 1954 Shreveport magazine. I'll give that to the next person who wants to go research it. So it's in a 54 magazine because Shreveport was, and Robert, I'm going to say it to you, I didn't believe it, but it was true. The magazine said Shreveport was the gas capital of the world.
And this is mid to late 1950s.
This is 1954. Now, this is after the plane crash, and what I'm saying to you is, how in the world did we go from being a white-collar town to by the early 70s, Texas Eastern is moving out, United Gas is already gone, it got bought out in a hostile takeover, and all the white-collar jobs went away. Why? What do we have now that we didn't have then? Computers. You had to have the white-collar workers because they were the computers. And so you offered all of them a job where? Houston, Texas.
So
that's where the white-collar jobs were.
I had moved away. I moved away from here in 72.
Well, you left just as the end was at the end.
And you hear people talk about like the oil and gas crash in this vague,
okay, that's 84,
sort of italicized thing. What effect did that, because that seems to be sort of concurrent with all the blue collar manufacturing jobs
coming to Shreveport. How did we get one for the other? It was a swap. I will say this. The leaders who were in now, Clyde Fant's mayor at this time. Clyde Fant's mayor all the way through the 60s. He won again in 58. And he's going to be mayor.
At that time, we're a moneyed town. We were a white-collar, big business, as you said.
Oil and gas money.
The gas capital, the natural gas capital, which is
of the world.
Is as an industry worldwide just beginning to explode, no pun intended.
Mm-hmm. And we lost all of the white-collar jobs. Now, I want to tell you where that was. a lot of that was not only in Broadmoor, and a lot of the people moved out of Broadmoor. Some of the older people with the United Gas had enough money to stay here because they could sell out their stocks and stay here, and they did. But what you lost was you lost all the lower end white collar workers that had to move. They had no other choice. They were going down to Houston, and they moved out of Caddo Heights. They moved out of some of the what I call kind of in the middle income areas of Southern Hills and otherwise, and they left Shreveport. And what we lost was we lost white collar jobs, and what we swapped for it was Western Electric. Western Electric starts popping in here in '64. Now, the reason I'm saying that, what follows, everything we got after then was labor intensive. That's blue collar. That also raised the quotient of union workers in Shreveport. And so the union workers came in. And that, now Shreveport was already a union town.
If I go back, we'll take a break here in just a couple of seconds, but I want to ask you this first. If I go back to about 1960, 65, somewhere in there, and the effect that those days and the things that happened 70 or 75 or what are now 75 years ago, and how it affects the city of Shreveport that you see today, it wasn't so much this governmental ineptitude or bad moves made by A or B or C. It was literally events that were so much bigger than Shreveport itself that just lined up. The stars aligned against us.
Well, it was a question of survival. I think they picked the right path to survive, because otherwise what happens? You lose not only the white collar jobs, you lose so much population.
But who would have seen the things that happened in the oil and gas industry that caused us to be a playa, in that industry? Who would have seen the Bill Clinton and free trade guys who were going to say, no, we can do NAFTA, we can do the WTO, all that stuff?
I'll tell you one person that saw it.
And who would have seen that? Who would have seen the destruction of Shreveport's manufacturing and industrial base, which I would think, and you said earlier this hour, that has brought us basically to where we are now.
Who normalized relations with China? What era did that happen? Who was the Secretary of State at that time who started?
Nixon going
Very
back.
good. See, you know your history.
And who was it? Alexander Haig?
No.
Who was his Secretary of State? I forget.
Kissinger negotiated
Henry
a lot of
Kissinger,
things.
okay.
And then who's going to wind up being the ambassador to China? I think I'm right on this.
Go ahead.
George H.W. Bush.
And so when you look at these things that happen on such a global scale, look, there's an old Vietnamese phrase, when elephants fight, ants die.
Well, yeah.
Is that basically Shreveport, what happened to us in a nutshell over the last 50, 60, 75 years? Elephants were fighting and we died?
Yeah, I think it really was, to be quite honest with you. I mean, we had, during the time that you're looking at Clyde Fenn as mayor, he had a great relationship with Russell Long, because Russell Long, and I know you've heard the conversation between Russell Long and Lyndon Johnson that's on tape. It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care much. Lyndon Johnson could not stand Shreveport. And that didn't play in well to this either, because we weren't going to get any favors. He wanted to take away Barksdale. And that's another thing. If it hadn't been for Barksdale, and it hadn't been for the growth during Vietnam, we'd have been in even worse shape. But because of that, we weren't. Now, the reason I'm throwing that in is that's the key for Shreveport is going to wind up being Barksdale. But the real key is we lost the ability to attract white-collar jobs because they all went to Houston, because those were the computers that Houston needed.